This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight.
All right. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. We have Chris Molaro, and you are West Point, Army, Wharton, Neuroflow, started the whole company into it.
Good to see you, Rob.
Thank you for having me. We're at your office, which is super cool, by the way, and like you overlooking City Hall.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. 16th and Market.
So, am I missing anything? Those are like the big highlights of it.
And now Dad.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's the best part.
Yeah, she's 18 months today.
Oh, congrats.
Thanks.
That's awesome. I've got 4 of my own, and that is the best part of life.
For sure, it is.
So let's talk about growing up. Where'd you grow up?
Well, that's a complicated question. I grew up on Queens and then Long Island. My parents got divorced and I moved with my dad to Pennsylvania in the Poconos. So I went from like riding the 7-train subway by myself at 10 to living in rural Pennsylvania when I was 11. So, but all my family is still on Long Island.
That's a pretty big change. So at that age, do you think that kind of changed where you were going or anything like that?
Well, in one regard, it did. I met my wife when I moved to Pennsylvania. She was in 7th grade with me. We didn't start dating until later on when we were adults, but we knew each other. We were friends. So that certainly changed a lot. And then from like a work ethic standpoint, there was little to distract you in Pennsylvania. So it was either you got in trouble or you could focus on work. And I chose, the latter for the most part.
What town did you actually grow up? What town in Pennsylvania?
It was called, so if everybody's familiar with The Office, right? The show The Office, it's Scranton.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like 30 minutes east of Scranton.
Okay.
In a small town called Lords Valley.
Okay.
Like it's literally the one stoplight town.
A lot of our company kind of grew up in, Pennsyltucky.
Yeah. That's exactly
a good bit of them. So the wrestlers and stuff don't have respect for the city. So they call us Flatlanders in the city.
Flatlanders?
From the hills of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, nice.
It's tough there. Were you a good kid or a bad kid?
I think for the most part, I was a good kid. Like a really oddly good kid. Something like the kid that was flagged as teacher's pet, nerd, would get picked on, that type of good kid.
Okay, so that was you.
Yes.
What were you into growing up? Did you play sports? Did you?
Yeah, it's probably my ADHD because I did a little bit of everything. I played ice hockey and baseball and growing up. And then I transitioned. I wasn't a good enough baseball player and hockey was too far away. So I transitioned to wrestling and ran track, like captain of the science Olympiad team. It's the nerd coming out of me. And then I was in theater too. So I did speech and musicals and plays. So like the wrestling team would make fun of me for leaving practice to go to my musical practice. And then the theater kids would be like, why are you doing wrestling? So it's like, I didn't get along with anybody or I got along with everybody. I guess it depends who you ask.
Right. Okay, so did one sport kind of stick out, or did you did that the whole time?
I was probably best at track, but I think wrestling was the most developmental in terms of like what it taught me.
Pennsylvania wrestling is legit. Pennsylvania wrestling is like
hard. Yeah.
I grew up a wrestler as well, and I think that it's both a team sport, but it's an individual sport. So you can't really blame anybody for your failures, and you literally feel naked on the mat. The first time you go out in a singlet in front of a gym.
It's might as well be naked.
Right.
It's like everybody knows what you're packing. and honestly, like there's nothing more humbling than the girl that I have a crush on, which by the way is my wife, it's like now wife.
Right.
She's in the stands looking at me and I'm getting my face jammed into the mat by this other guy. And I'm like, wow, there's nothing more demasculating and humbling than that moment in time. And talk about motivating you to work out and practice more. So like that shit never happens to you again.
As a formulative thing, when you're going through it, I think it's interesting that for me, the input in versus what you get out of it is the first time that you're like, wow, hard work actually works. Like I can see what happens.
Yeah.
And maybe because it's at those ages, you grow every year anyway. And so you'll pick on, if you were a freshman, you'll beat, as a sophomore, you should probably beat the freshman because you're more developed and you put more hard work into it or whatever stage that you're in. The input in is the input out to a certain degree. Like, I don't know that life is fully that, but at that point I learned that like how you work hard.
100%. And And that it takes sacrifice too. I mean, with wrestling, the eating habits suck too.
Right.
It's like sacrifice, right?
Right.
Like needed to like sweat it out and stuff like that.
The weight cutting is
Not fun at all. My father-in-law now was my wrestling coach back then. So he was like in my corner. He taught me I remember, again, I didn't grow up wrestling. You know, like there's a lot of these. When did you start wrestling?
So I got my ass kicked by my brothers my whole life, but not. I would go to tournaments in middle school, but high school is where I really like was all in. Like, but it was just I would go by myself to tournaments and go wrestle in tournaments. Really, I wasn't even on a team.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah. So, but that was you started wrestling earlier on. So I didn't even step onto a mat. I didn't have any inclination to wrestle until 10th grade because I was playing ice hockey until then. But the ice hockey rink was like an hour and a half from our house, and it just didn't make sense to like keep going out there. And I was good at ice hockey, but I wasn't so good that it warranted going an hour and a half each way every day. Right. So I stopped that, started wrestling in 10th grade. And again, like I'm a 10th grader. Some of these kids have been wrestling since they were 3rd grade. Right. And so I had to learn.
In Pennsylvania before.
100%. Yeah. So the 10th grade wrestling year for me was humbling, but it also taught you like, look, put the work in. And then I made the varsity team junior year and on from there. So as you're in high school, you've got your future father-in-law as your coach. At what point did you say West Point, Army, military? Did any of that? When did that start tracking in your mind? So I don't come from a military family. My grandfather and his brothers served in World War II in Korea because everybody served back then. But my dad is the furthest thing from the military. I grew up in a lower middle class family, first person to go to college in my family. Just remember being like this Italian immigrant family, always fighting on money and all this stuff, like living paycheck to paycheck. And, but like a good household. Like we never were like having trouble eating and everything like that. But I just remember being so dead set on wanting to work hard to get into an Ivy League school. I worked my ass off. And when it became clear that I could actually get accepted to a Princeton or a Cornell or something like that, my dad sat me down and talked to me and was like, we're not going to be able to pay for this. Like, you need to go to a state school or something. And I just didn't accept that. So I looked into options to pay for it. And that's when I learned about ROTC. And I got a full ROTC scholarship. But my wrestling teammate, now brother-in-law, was applying to the Naval Academy. And everybody was making a huge deal about Naval Academy. Oh my God. And
was he older?
He was 2 years older than me. So his class of 08. And I'm like, what is this academy thing? So then I looked more into the academies and I said, well, if they're making that big a deal about him going to the Naval Academy, imagine if you went to the best military academy. And that's what got me into West Point.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, I didn't go I was in the Navy, but not the academy, so that doesn't cut hard to me at all.
No, but maybe
I'm not offended by that.
Maybe some of the people listening.
No,
right?
Certainly
Go
within our company. Yeah. So you end up saying, hey, this is a pretty cool thing, and that's post 9/11 at this point.
The assistant wrestling coach at the time tells me, so if you remember the name, there's I don't know, I mean, he's famous for West Point. A guy by the name Mike Vitti played running back, fullback for West Point. He was class of 08. So he wrestled at Berwick, Pennsylvania, Berwick High School. And he was like an all-state wrestler, state champion, is heavyweight. And he was applying to West Point. He went to West Point. My coach, when he found out I was applying to West Point, said, do you really think you're West Point material? Mike Vitti is going to West Point. And I was a 112 weight class guy. Mike Vitti's a heavyweight guy. Right. And I'm like, screw you, dude. Yeah, I think I'm West Point material. And then I got into West Point. And then he goes, okay, congratulations, you got in, but do you really think like you're going to make it there? Like nothing motivated me more from that point forward. I went and, I was super stoked. I mean, it was one of those places that you hate being while you're a cadet because it feels like prison. And you're on Facebook, you see all your friends having fun at Penn State or Rutgers, whatever school they're at. And you're having to clean your room on Saturday morning. But being from there now is an amazing network to be a part of.
Was there anything, you said the selection of it, you wanted to go be the best. Were there movies? Was there any inspiration? Did you read books about it? Did you Or was it more just your network of people being like, this is a good school, what you saw in front of you going to a service academy? Were you brainwashed by G.I. Joe like I was? That's the question.
Yeah, I love G.I. Joe. And I mean, I played soldier all the time. I could pull up a kid's photo of me playing Army, like for Halloween or something like that. Like, back then you could actually wear bullets and guns and not offend people. But we went to the academy for a visit when I was like, I don't know, 16 years old. And I was just, this is amazing. Like the history of it, right? Like Eisenhower, Grant, MacArthur, it's just phenomenal. And then you learn all there's business leaders too, like the CEO of Johnson & Johnson and 7-Eleven and these, secretaries of state and senators, congressmen, they're all these alumni of this institution. And to have the option to go there was humbling in a lot of ways. Like, and I hate, I mean, like you could say that about a lot of schools, but again, from my personal situation, the cost was right too. Like we didn't have a lot of money as a family. So to get to go there and not have to go into any debt was a big plus as well.
I think the alumni network is interesting of the service academies. I think that in comparison to other schools, elite prestigious schools, I don't know if you're the class of, 2024, if you go reach out to the class of 1976, that they necessarily pick up the phone the same way that same classmate, from a lifetime difference would at a service academy. So I think even cross service academy, and even to a small degree, just being in the military, they pick up the phone.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you're, if you went to an academy, they pick up the phone, and that's very different.
I mean, I don't know for sure if that's different, not having gone to another school, but it is amazing. At West Point, it doesn't matter what class you are, they pick up the phone. So when people ask me like, oh, you went to West Point, my uncle went to West Point. And I said, oh, what's his name? Different class, you won't know him. I go, no, try me, because like, it doesn't matter classes. Right. And a lot of times investors in Neuroflow, a lot of investors in Neuroflow are grads, mentors are grads. I mean, it's a unique place to be from.
Yeah, it's really cool. So what was that experience like? You said it was a little bit like a prison while everybody else is partying. What was your take on your time?
Prison, relatively speaking, to what your other friends are doing, right? Like, it wasn't, in hindsight, I don't think it was as bad as maybe we thought it was at the time. We like to think it's hardcore, but it's just really an extra college it's just a college you wear uniforms to, and you have extra responsibility that you wouldn't otherwise have. I loved my time there, honestly. Like even my freshman year, which is called plebe year, sucks because you don't have a lot of liberties, but you found loopholes. So I did these things where I always signed up for clubs that got you to leave camp. So you're not allowed to leave base or post as a freshman unless it's on official duty. Well, if I'm part of a club that's traveling to New York City or California, that's official duty. And so you're allowed to leave and you get a free paid trip. So sophomore year, as an example, I was part of the Catholic choir. I'm not a very good singer, but I was part of the Catholic choir. I sang for the Pope at Yankee Stadium, and I would never have gotten to do that if I wasn't at West Point. So that's an example of, I think, using the system to your benefit.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you go through that. How does it work when you're trying to select like what job you get or what branch, or not branch, because
branch. Yeah. So artillery, infantry, aviation. I wanted to do aviation. I wanted to fly, but my class rank wasn't high enough. And the only way I would have been able to get it was if I offer, so you have to give 5 years of active service after the military. If you say, I'm willing to give 8, they move you up in the preference stack to get whatever you want. I wasn't willing to say I wanted to give 8 for aviation. So I went the artillery route. Obviously, it worked out because I transitioned out after that and started Neuroflow. I would not have done that if I was in aviation. So anyway, you put there's like 16 branches to choose from. You rank order them, and wherever your class rank falls is where you get so artillery was my first choice. That's what I got.
In hindsight, you can't know what you're going into it, but if somebody's listening to this kind of going down that path, what made you say that I don't want to stay longer? Because I think a lot of people don't really know. I think people are surprised who spent 20 years in, who's like, I was going to get out at first opportunity. And people who said that they were going to stay in their whole life get out at first opportunity. Like, you just don't, no one really knows. Did you have any thought what your future would be like? Were you thinking about that when you were 22 years old?
No, I just wanted, well, yes, I guess kind of, but I didn't have a plan to get out, but I didn't have a plan to stay in.
Right.
So I wanted the optionality.
Okay.
And obligating another 3 years, remove that optionality for 3 more years.
Right.
So I wanted the option that I can exercise it.
Okay.
And ultimately that's why I decided to do that. But best advice I've ever been given was first by my dad, but then multiple people have reiterated this, was when you have a job and you made a commitment, do that job and commitment the best way you know how to, no matter what it is. So my first job ever was at McDonald's. Like literally, he said, make sure that the station that you're on at McDonald's is the best station ever. The floors are the cleanest, the fries are the best, whatever. And you're going to learn a lot in that process. People are going to notice it, and it's going to be applicable to other pieces of life. So when I was joining the Army, I wanted to be focused on being the best lieutenant possible, not about like, how can I use this to get to the next station in life? You know what I mean?
Go back to McDonald's.
Yeah.
How old were you working McDonald's?
15 was my first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you walk away with anything from McDonald's that you still use in your life? To some degree, you just said that you did. Tell me a little bit more about what that was like and how did that shape you?
So I got fired twice from McDonald's. The lessons that I learned were how to, I think, deal with complex people that had a variety of different moods, like both customers and coworkers that would come in. Some would be pissed off, some would be difficult to deal with, some would be slower, some would be, and just like having to deal with those people and still do your job effectively. I think I used when I was an officer in the Army. I used when I'm a CEO of this company. I used when I'm a dad and a father and a husband. So the people aspect of things, I think, is key. And McDonald's taught me a lot about that.
Is there anything that you remember on how that process works that you apply? I worked at a Starbucks years ago. I worked in a kitchen at the same time.
Yeah.
So like there's still stuff about when I see lines and operational process flow that's like outside of the norms of what Starbucks taught me when I think I was like 22 when I did it.
Yeah.
It still bothers me when I go into any restaurant that's not organized and how they deal with stuff. Like,
right.
Oh, you could do this way better with fewer people. Not necessarily when I was 16 in a kitchen or something like that would I have done that, but at 22, like it still bothers me to this day.
Really?
When you go into place and how it organized, like there's a better process, and I'm an operations person. So I actually learned from Starbucks, and they have a good system. Does McDonald's have a good system still? Did you apply any of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what their whole shtick is right. Everything is the same process, whatnot. I think there's such a benefit to having experience in the services industry. I mean, I think if everybody could get at least like 1 year in the services industry, it teaches you so much on how to deal with people again, how to attention to detail, how to the operations side of things that I think is so applicable elsewhere, like being a waiter or busboy or, in the kitchen. The services industry is and it's hard work. It's like really hard work, but I think a lot of it's applicable elsewhere too. That's one of the reasons I got fired at McDonald's. So this is the second time I got fired. So I was back in the grill and I got to order.
Was it the same McDonald's?
Yeah. Yeah. So
how do you get fired twice and come back?
So the first time I was on the 15 and a half years old, I was doing phenomenal. Like I was working so hard. They put me in charge of a shift. I was like the youngest shift manager. I don't know if this is like actually true, but I at least say I was the youngest shift manager.
Very young.
So I was wearing the blue shirt, I felt like I was a big deal. And they had me on the opening shift on Saturdays and Sundays, which meant that I had to get to the store at like 3 a.m. to prep the store to get it ready for a 4:30 or 5 a.m. opening. And I hated it because it meant that I couldn't really have a social life. Because Friday and Saturday night, if I had to wake up, I have to be there at 3. I had to go to bed at like 8 or 9 if I wanted to get decent sleep. And, the rare case I was invited to a party or something like that, I'd want to go. So I kept asking.
It has a party tonight.
Right. So I kept asking the owners to move me. Like I didn't want to be an opening shift. And they never did. And so just one morning I decided I wasn't going to open up the store. And so I slept in. I'm not proud of that.
I mean, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You don't ever put the idiot in charge.
Right. I'm not proud of that.
Yeah.
This is something that a lesson learned about being when you make a commitment, you follow through on it.
Yeah.
But I wake up that next morning, my dad's like, what are you still doing here? You're supposed to be at work. I go, decided I'm not going. So he drove me down there, made me go inside, apologize, begged for my job back. They put me on a 3-month probation period. I came back 3 months later, but I was off the opening shift at least. So second time, I'm back in the grill and I get an order come through that says extra pickles. Now, standard pickles were like 3 to 5 pickle slices. So extra pickles were 6 to 9 pickles.
Right.
I was firmly in the 6 to 9 pickles, like by the standard. And this person that ordered was not happy with 6 to 9 pickles. She did not think that was appropriately extra pickles.
That was not enough pickles.
That's right. She starts yelling and screaming and like hemming and hawing, like rude, but she was out of line.
Right.
Now, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And so I said, all right, bring it back here. I grab as many pickles as I can and I put it on there and I stack the bun and it's like, burger, pickles, bun, ship that out front. And she then complained to the manager that got me fired.
Too many.
So, look, again, not proud of that, but I think
at least it was after an argument because I feel like most of my friends would have done that. Just ordering
extra pickles? Okay.
Yeah. So they would have been in the wrong. Like, so you gave me 75 pickles.
Yeah. I think what it taught me is like patience is key too. It's like, okay, like, she could yell at me. I become a student of Marcus Aurelius's meditations and like stoicism, which the basic principle is you can't control what's happening to you. You could only control how you react to it. Right. So I can't control that lady yelling, but I could control like how I reacted to it. And in that instance, I did not react in an appropriate manner, I'd say. But that principle is much easier said than done.
It is.
But, practicing it and being aware of it has I think helped me even in this role today because better than anybody, like running a business with a lot of people, a lot of customers, sometimes rationality doesn't win the day. And so if you could stay calm and collected, that helps a lot.
It does. So, okay, going now, what was your Army career like? So you show up, you're West Point.
Yeah.
You've been fired from McDonald's twice.
Yeah, that's right. That was not on my resume.
From a theater kid to West Point. You had a pretty decent experience. What was like showing up and doing that job?
I was artillery. My first base was Fort Hood, Texas. What was Fort Hood at the time? 1st Cavalry Division. I don't know if they did this in the Navy, but they taught us like to write a letter to your commander saying, my name's Lieutenant Molaro. I'm currently in the basic. So after West Point, you go to what's called the basic course that teaches you the specifics of your branch. So we go to the basic course, which was for artillery in Oklahoma. And then so we were writing letters to our commanders. Now I thought, I don't know what I thought. I wrote it to the brigade commander. You're only supposed to, I guess, write it to like the company commander.
Okay.
So I wrote it to the brigade commander, full bird colonel, saying that I wanted to be a platoon leader. So I show up to my unit and I get called into the commander's office being like, you're the kid that wrote a letter telling the brigade commander what job you wanted. I go, yes, sir, that's me. They go, well, we're going to give you a platoon. I'm like, oh, great, it worked out. But I got so much shit for it. So they gave me a platoon and the battalion commander, Colonel Wright, calls me in his office and goes, have you found a place to live down here in Texas? I've been there for 2 weeks. I'm like, no, I'm crashing with a friend while I look for a place. He goes, well, don't look for a place. We're deploying in a week and a half. Your platoon is going as the advance party to Iraq. So just get a storage unit. And I'm like, oh, shit. Okay, cool. My dad, again, not military family, call my dad. And I go, hey, Dad, surprise. I'm deploying in like a week. He flew down immediately, spent the whole week with me, but immediately deployed, 6 months after graduating West Point. Go to southern Iraq. This is 2011 and spend a year there, not doing artillery mission at all. We were doing infantry stuff. So counter IED, counter IDF. We did some house clearances for, when we had high value targets that we knew were in the area. And the whole mission was we were exiting the country. So there's this major highway, MSR Tampa, which goes to Kuwait, which is the major vein artery for trucks and stuff like that. So as the country on the north, as we were exfilling, they'd come through our AO and go to Kuwait. So we were securing the last 100 miles of that highway. And then at the end of the year, we exited and left. And that was the one and only deployment I had. I got off pretty easy relative to other people. It was a transcended experience though. You know how sometimes you have like those experiences you just like walk away, you're like, holy crap, I learned a lot in that year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why was it transcendent?
I had 40 soldiers under my command, most of which were my age or older, and so much more experience than me. And it was humbling in a lot of ways. Like I learned a lot from them when shit hit the fan and we were getting rockets thrown at us. You know, they looked to you and said, "What's the plan, sir? Like, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "The hell do I know?" I mean, like, you know, you have to figure it out. And in a lot of missions, we were off the grid, out of radio range of HQ, and so you just had to figure it out with you and your guys. There's actually 2 women with us and 38 guys. The 2 women would help with translation for and with the Iraqi women relations. So figuring it out in a disparate area with just your soldiers to your left and right, finite materials and resources. A lot of that's actually applicable today with startups.
I think one of the best things about the military, and maybe worst, and all of it, is the amount that you get put in charge of. And the military puts 22-year-olds in particular, more than any other age group, just because of the young officers, in charge of so much more than they're capable of handling. And then they make you handle it. The environment isn't just set up for failure, but that is a failing idea. A 22-year-old is not capable of doing that. The amount of money and the amount of stuff isn't even translatable in the civilian world because no one would be dumb enough to do that. A 22-year-old is not capable of doing that. They don't know where the bathroom is, and they're like, figure it out. Yeah, you're going to get some crusty, E7 who's going to be like, I'm going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
But like,
my platoon sergeant, I couldn't have done it without him.
Right.
But I think what it did in terms of like transcendent moments is that it forced you to grow up real quick. And so like, I was 22 in age, but I guess the West Point training at least had done for us. And I mean, you would get this at ROTC and OCS too, would be, it really, they drilled in your head that you were graduating not responsible for yourself, but responsible for the platoon that you were going to be in charge of. And those soldiers deserved a leader that was prepared to lead them. So it's like you were 22 in age, I think a lot older in maturity wise, mature enough to know to listen to the people that are more experienced and like learn from them along the way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is something that rings true for kind of everybody who's in the military. I was enlisted, but it was different. Like I was enlisted like after college anyway. So I was older kind of like as I showed up. But there's a beauty in being in charge when you're probably ill prepared to be in charge. And it's almost delicious when you fuck it up in front of everybody who knows better than you do.
100%.
And when you're 22-year-old, we were going to do this. And this is the way it is. And everybody knows that you're wrong. Yeah. And they're just like, all right, we're going to let this guy work through it. He's a moron. And, I was that as like an E6 and as, the leading petty officer. And I had been in for a while, like kind of playing that role where you're just like, why is everybody fucked up? And they're like, no, you said the wrong time. And you're like, oh my God, I said the wrong time. And you do it and you'll yell at everybody and they're like, it's written on the back of the board, you moron.
Yeah.
And like, they'll be nice a couple times. They'll let you be a moron.
Yeah.
And then you have to eat it and you're just like, I'm sorry. And then how do you handle that? Sometimes you just ignore it. They pretend that you don't. And you're like, ooh, you were supposed to own that mistake. And like all of those kind of things. It's like delicious having fucked up in front of 50 really good people.
I was scared of that happening, I think, candidly.
Yeah.
And so maybe to a fault, I went the opposite way.
Right.
And I remember the very first conversation I had with my platoon sergeant. I go, look, we're in this together. We have joint success or joint failures. At the end of the day, if something goes wrong, I'm going to be the one that has to answer to the battalion commander or brigade commander and going to be held accountable. But I need to lean on you for a lot of this. And so just recognize that, like, if push comes to shove, I'm ultimately accountable for what happens here. I would be doing a disservice to you, to the platoon, and myself if I didn't listen to your expertise. And so, like, we're in this together. I remember that was like, if not the first, one of the first conversations I had with him. And I think he appreciated that, and it brought us like together in that regard. Similar conversation when I'm here at Neuroflow as CEO. We have a chief revenue officer who's been in the industry for 30 years. I'm not going to tell him how to like lead his sales team. It's like, that's why we hired him. But ultimately I'm accountable to the board, and our board's going to say like, you're hitting your numbers, not hitting your numbers. And I could say, well, it's because our CRO is doing this. They're going to be like, you're the CEO. I don't care about, like, hold him accountable. And so it's kind of this like dichotomy of he's the expert, has the experience, but I'm on the hot seat, if that makes sense.
So you're describing something that is supposed to happen that does not always happen, though. I mean, I think
that's true.
Right. Yeah. To do that and to be able to have the maturity to step aside and say, I'm going to take all the advice. I'm going to try to make the best and most informed decision as I can, lead without ego and those kind of things.
Yeah, 100%.
That is a unique thing that I think people are put in, and you have to learn how to do that. 100%. And if you can learn how to do that, you can do it the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So you did a year-long deployment. You said that was the one and only overseas.
Yep.
What was like an exceptionally good day in the Army for you? Like what stands out amongst others as something that was successful that you'll always smile about it in the Army?
I mean, I loved just showing up early, getting a good workout in with your platoon, going, changing, showing up, going to the motor pool, being there with my soldiers, taking a lunch break, sometimes go and hit the gym a second time that day, like over lunch, and being with some of the hardest working people doing, sometimes mundane tasks. Like the Army's not like Hollywood all the time, as you know. Actually, most of it's mundane. It's like hurry up and wait. But then when like this, it's just that first time rolling out of the FOB in Iraq with our Humvees, you get this like jolt of adrenaline. You're like, oh shit, we're doing this. This is the first mission. And then coming back and like, you almost build that confidence. It's like, it felt awesome, humbling and exciting. And just a mix of feelings to say like, what I'm here, I'm doing it with my soldiers. And I get to go back to base, get some chow, go to the gym again. Like just like the brotherhood that you get from that. I don't know if it's like any one day. It's like that combination. And then when we're back home, getting to do that, but then with the families of the soldiers and meeting their their spouses and their kids and stuff like that. I mean, I was single at the time, and so I couldn't relate from that family perspective yet, but just getting to have that camaraderie. And I was always self-conscious as the officer because I felt like the outsider. And so I tried to do whatever I could to meet them where they're at and learn what they're doing so I could empathize. So if they're in the motor pool working, I hated being in the office. I'd go down the motor pool and say, teach me what you're doing because I have no idea and I want to learn. And I've tried to approach my life in general with that constant student mentality. Like I just always want to, we have 40 engineers here at Neuroflow. I'll ask them like, can you show me what you're working on? How does the code work? And they're like, well, why do you care? You're the CEO. Because I'm the CEO of a tech company, I should know how the code works, or at least like be informed enough to be dangerous to have a conversation about it. I don't have to, I'm never going to be as good a coder as you, but I should at least be able to talk the language with you. Right. And I think people, at least, I don't know, maybe they're giving me lip service. I think that they appreciate that and brings me closer to them so that when I ask them to do something, it's coming from a perspective I know what it takes to do it. It's just not like, do this because I'm telling you to do it sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what is a low point of the Army? What was like a bad day?
When I saw something that clearly could have been done better and should have been done better, and I tried to change it, and I was told to shut up and step in line because you're an LT. Like, that happened all the time. I got my hand slapped by lieutenant colonels and majors every day because I said, why are we doing it this way? It's because it's what your boss did and what their boss did, and we're just continuing the same pattern. It doesn't make any. Now, if you gave me the intent and the why, and maybe there was a reason behind it, but there were so many times I wasn't told the reason. I was just, because it's the way it is. It's like, that doesn't make any sense.
So I think going back to you listened to your E7s and you didn't talk over them. And I actually think that's more rare than you think that it is. And that not starting with the why, I think the military is really bad at. And when you get to go kill bad guys, you know the why. When you get to defend the freedom of the country, you get to know why. But most of the time, it's not really that clear for you because it's not exciting.
Right.
My grandfather fought in World War II in Iwo Jima, and I went and visited him one time and I got a haircut with him, and another veteran was cutting his hair. This is right last year of his life. He died in his 90s.
Wow.
And he's just like, the Army is the dumbest organization that exists on the planet. He's proud of his Army service, right? And he's just like, and I was in the SEAL teams at that point. He's like, you're in an awesome organization, but the same thing's going to happen to you there. Like, don't let the bastards grind you down, which is funny, just knowing that the organizations are unfixable and they always have been unfixable. And great Americans go serve there. And, you know, you go read Band of Brothers and Dick Winters, what an unbelievable inspiration.
100%.
And he hated the Army. Now he's proud of his service and he did it the best, but he's just like the bureaucracy was so stupid.
Right.
He got court-martialed. He's like one of the best leaders. They literally teach about him.
Mm-hmm. And he got court-martialed. Yeah.
Or silly stuff at like boot camp. Just because he's like, wait a minute, this is really dumb. Let's go do it this way. Well, this guy's going to get people killed. We got to do it this way. And they're like, shut up, know your place. And you're like, oh my God.
I tell people, and civilians kind of don't understand this. I go like, being deployed is so much better than being stateside. Not because necessarily you want to be in a combat zone, but because when you're in combat, not all, but most of the BS falls to the wayside because they're like, we need to get the mission is first. We have to be more efficient. And so a lot of the bureaucracy goes away. They let me, as the PL, make decisions. If we're back in Texas, we have to ask permission to go further than 50 miles away from base. It's like, what? We're in a combat zone. And I just want to go to Austin.
Right.
You know, and it's
have
like
barbecue for lunch.
Yeah, right.
No?
And that sort of common sense reigns supreme when it's life and death. But when we're back in a training environment, common sense seems to go out the window or efficiency goes out the window. But it's almost like the most risk-oriented organization in the military, which literally were life and death situations, becomes the most risk-adverse organization in certain circumstances. And it's just, I think, inefficient and, you know, that sort of thing. So as you're moving, I want to get, you know, kind of why you're doing what you're doing now. Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there anything else from the Army that you think is worthwhile or the transition? Because I think I want to focus on transition and what you're doing now. Yeah.
I mean, look, I think that there's a lot of good that came from the Army. I'm proud of my service. I think if I had to go back and do it again, I would. I loved it. It just, there were a lot of things that I didn't love. And I actually thought that I could do more for the Army and more for veterans being outside of the Army, which is now, I mean, Northflow does a lot of work with the DoD and the VA. So I think that's, you know, and I'll meet with generals and secretaries on the regular today. Today, if I stayed in, I would be a major. I'd not be meeting with generals and secretaries today. You know what I mean? Right. So best piece of advice that I got while I was in the Army came from a 1-star general who was a mentor of mine. When I was talking to him about the decision to get out or stay in, I was expecting him to try to convince me to stay in. And he took the opposite approach. He goes, you need to do what's right for you. My only ask is you are clear on what you want to do when you get out. Like you run to something, you don't run away from the Army. So run, because a lot of people, the grass is always greener. If you're just trying to get away from the Army, you're going to go to a job in the civilian world, and there's jobs in the civilian world that suck too. So run to something, not away from the Army. And so that's why I decided to apply to business schools. And I said, if I'm going to get into a top 10 school, that's what I'm going to run to, as opposed to running away from the Army. So I wasn't going to get out until I got into one of those schools.
So what was that like? We met at school.
Yeah.
So we met at Wharton. What was your experience there like? What was that transition like? You had something that was different than others where you started this during school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing that, like, I'm jealous of the purpose and the idea that you had as I took like a regular job. I went and worked for Amazon right away,
Were you in the supply chain part of Amazon? Like the warehouses?
Yeah. I think it was good what I did, but you had the idea in school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was jealous of that. And I think that a lot of people wish they could have that. And I think that it's unusual to, like, your process was unusual even for the students who went in.
Yeah.
Not that many people start the companies in school.
Right.
And a lot of people take some time and do consulting, and then they have their idea and then they see the opportunity and I need to develop my skills first.
Yeah.
And then do that later. Were you did you go in with that? How did that start? So describe going to Wharton, go to business school, and then coming up with the idea there.
Yeah. So getting to Wharton, just a lesson, I guess, for veterans that are transitioning that want to go to a top business school. I have a relatively low GPA. I had a 680 GMAT score, which is way lower than average at Wharton. And I wasn't a SEAL or special forces or anything. So like there's nothing special about my background. I did start a nonprofit when I was in the Army that raised close to $1 million to support vets and their families, which I think helped the Wharton story. But my whole thing was I wanted to go there again to kind of like blank slate, learn as much as possible. I had no idea what I wanted to do in the business world, but this was like an opportunity to reset and apply the leadership lessons I had from the Army to the business world, whatever that looked like. So I get to Wharton, and it was, I mean, I think it was an awesome experience. There were some things that frustrated me, but that's anything in life. Actually, I didn't have the idea right away. So I went down the normal veteran path of consulting. So I did, I was casing, interviewing at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, all the regulars. I get a full-time offer, or I get a summer offer at McKinsey, which I accept. So I summer at McKinsey for 2.5 months or so. The spring semester first year, so before McKinsey, is when we started on the idea. I met a bioengineering PhD student on how we can use objective data to measure mental health more effectively. So we started working on that idea, but I still went to McKinsey, worked there, got a full-time offer, accepted the full-time offer, but deferred the start date for another year. So I was graduating May of 2017. I wasn't going to start until May of 2018. What that gave me was it gave all a second year I didn't have to recruit for a job because I had McKinsey. And then a year after Wharton, it gave me another year. So I had 2 years to try to make this work risk-free, because if it didn't work, I would just go back to McKinsey.
So you came back from the summer. The summer offers were not, they're at the end of the summer they offer, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how they do it. So you went in with that and you thought to defer at that moment.
A theme with me is I like optionality. That's why.
Right.
So I was at, I don't want to commit right now. I want optionality. So I deferred. They allowed me to defer it. And then the whole second year when everybody was recruiting for jobs, I already had a job.
Right.
So I didn't have to recruit. So that whole second year was like an incubator period for Neuroflow.
So let's get into that.
Yeah.
So where was the idea from? How did that evolve? How'd you build it?
I had an experience in the military. I had a few friends and West Point classmates that died by suicide. We all have. I mean, it's not just
We all have.
I mean, it's just, even the folks that are listening that are not military, we know people in the civilian world. So I had a soldier that also died by suicide. And the reality of that was frustrating was we learned that he never followed up with care, never went to the therapist, never got his medications, and no one ever followed up with him to check in. Hey, how's it going? And everything. We just assumed that, it was getting taken care of. That's more of the rule than the exception across the industry. So I thought technology should be able to help fill that gap, not replace the therapist and the psychiatrist and so forth, but using data to help identify what the risk level of somebody is. Like if we both have anxiety is not binary. It's not you have it or don't have it. There's varying degrees of it. Maybe you have like minor anxiety because of the business that's going on right now, where I have like debilitating social anxiety. Those require different treatment plans and different levels of care and so forth. And then using data analytics to track outcomes over time. Like, are you actually improving or not improving? The analogy I like to use with people is imagine if 67% of people that had cancer never got it treated. That's the mental health standard today. 67% of people that have mental health issues don't get it treated. And then imagine if in the course of your cancer treatment, the doctor just asked you, are you feeling better? Is your tumor doing better? That would be, you'd be like, are you going to measure that? But that's the standard that's applied to mental health. So they just like, are you feeling better? There's no objectivity to it. Now that's changing, and we're a big part of that change. I had a very personal tie because of my military connection and losing soldiers and friends to suicide, issues that could have been solved if we knew about it ahead of time. And so that's my personal reason why. That's my passion for what we do every day. So the second year at Wharton, we started developing the prototype technology platform that was going to be installed at therapy clinics to help them be more informed with how care was going. It got enough traction where we raised $1 million seed round at the end of my second year. So graduated, went into that and did that, and here we are.
What was that process like?
with the raising.
Yep.
Probably the single hardest thing I've ever had to do professionally, including in the Army.
And you'd already raised $1 million for a charity before.
Yeah. But I mean,
It's different, but it's still similar.
Yeah, it's similar because you're having to sell people on the vision and everything like that. But that was done over the course of years, that $1 million. And it wasn't like we were paying ourselves. So it wasn't to operate the business. It was to 100% of the money we raised for the charity went back to the service members and veterans. This was, we're raising $1 million so that we could spend it to build something. And I talked to 141 investors before I got my first yes, I'll invest. 141 people told us no. And in hindsight, I think they're totally rational for doing that. I didn't have a business background. Wharton was my only business background. So nothing real tactical. And I didn't have a healthcare background. What business did I have starting this company? I think in hindsight, I had all the business starting it. I was a leader that was passionate, that built a team of experts that surrounded us, but took one who's actually a veteran, successful veteran in the business world that believed in us, that signed on for the first commitment of $250K. And once he came on, a lot of other investors followed and oversubscribed, raised $1.25 million. But with every no, we learned a lot from that. I would always ask, okay, totally get it. I'm not going to try to convince you, but can you help me understand what you need to see to get you to a yes? Feedback was a gift in this case, because I would be able to adjust my pitch to where eventually investors were like, okay, this makes sense. I still have the screenshot of when we got the money wired to us. Our bank account showed $1.25 million, which in the scheme of things is not a lot of money, but for me is the most. I've never seen that amount of money in a bank account. So it was pretty cool.
I walked around the office while waiting for this, and I saw, I think you have rooms named after everything here, which is pretty cool. So you have your first investor is the name of a room here.
Yeah, it's Wayne Tamarelli. He's the Army veteran. He passed away last year, but we wouldn't be a company if it wasn't for Wayne.
Your boardroom is named after him. That's pretty cool. Yeah. I noticed that. I walked through and I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Wayne's a good guy.
141 is what you said?
141. So he was under 42.
That's awesome. Yeah. Sometimes it just takes 141 no's. I crossed paths with you numerous times over the years through that, and we would commiserate about asking for money and how it's just terrible. Yeah. I think that people assume that that's easier than it is, because that stuff hurts. Sometimes the feedback is good. Sometimes I don't think that they ever intended on investing in anything. Some of the people that you talk to, you just have to learn who to pitch to and how to do that, because when you don't know, where can I go? And there's organizations that say they invest that don't actually invest.
Right.
And you have to learn that whole process. But it's really interesting to go through that and say, what feedback do you take and what feedback do you disregard? Because to some extent, you're a crazy person asking for something that's irrational, who will be crazy with me,
right,
and really believes in it.
100%. And wants to take that risk with you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult. And at this point, we are in probably the high, closer to 1,000 no's at this point of beyond anything that, whatever it is that you're asking for, that you go into a room as an entrepreneur, that you champion your successes, but people don't realize that you've had 1,000 no's going into that room and you seem confident and dead set on it.
Yeah.
You get told no all the time.
It's like everybody is an overnight success.
Right.
Right. But they don't realize everything that went into that.
Right.
For us too, it was finding investors that wanted to come along for the ride with you. So it's you're not going to get an immediate return tomorrow or a year from now, or even 3 years from now. You wanted to help us grow this and not just write a check, but give us advice and mentor and stuff like that. And some of those no's came back and invested later, but they didn't do that until they saw more traction.
Right.
But a funny story here, before we raised the round and got the $1.25 million, we had raised some grant money. And when I was at Wharton, all the student business plan competitions, so we raised about $140,000 of free money that we're paying for our interns and stuff like that. And some of them, I told them don't apply for jobs, because they were graduating too. I said, we're raising money. I'll hire you full time with a real salary. We had $140,000, so we're paying them. We're about $10,000 left of that $140,000, and then we were about to close the round. But there was a time period where we almost were going to miss payroll, and so I talked to my wife, and again, we don't have a lot of money. And I said, I need you to trust me, and I need you to write me a $10,000 check because I need to pay these people. But I'll give it back to you as soon as we get the $1.25 million in. So she had to trust me that we were actually going to do that. Otherwise, and we were married for like 6 months at this point. And so she wrote me the check, but I never had to cash it because the investment came in like 2 days before we ran out of money. So
you're a lot more responsible than we were. We were in credit card debt paying people.
Good for you.
And we didn't have checks coming. It was not.
So
it was like we'll get it eventually. It was that painful feeling. I know that painful feeling of almost running out of money a lot, and then just in the nick of time.
I don't think some people know how close we came sometimes.
Yeah, you must want to throw up.
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome. The failure. What is it like growing this company? Like you have a lot of customers, you've raised a lot of money, you've built a lot, your team's really big. What are lessons that other people know that you would give to other people as advice for doing it? So one of the things that we talked about is there's way more failure than I think a lot of people understand, and there's a lot more heartache to build it. But what were some of the great things that you have learned over time?
I think one thing that we've never tried to stop doing was having fun along the way. I mean, like, yeah, even the hard days here, you're still getting to build a business. Like even when things go wrong, you're still in the driver's seat. For better or worse, every day we come to work and we're getting to make an impact. Like there's no bureaucracy or anything like that. And so trying to really celebrate the wins along the way, even if it's like your first customer. The conference rooms that we have named after people, either named after people that have helped us along the way or named after old office spaces that we've had. And there we have stats on like how big the company was at the time, because the room that we're in right now, this is about the size of the first office that we had. Which is like,
we had the same thing,
Yeah. And now our office is 16,000 square feet, and we have 125 employees. 17 million people on the platform. It's easy to forget back in the day when we were an office this size, and so we try to celebrate the wins. We try to be nostalgic. We try to always have an ode to the past and respect the past, learn from the past, and move forward. One thing I think we've done well early on was always acting and operating like we're a quote real business. Like I never try to use the word startup or anything like that because I felt like we needed to approach this with the seriousness as if you were a business, not a project. And so we would always have like, the company t-shirts or the hats, just to like that team camaraderie.
People care about that stuff. It matters a lot.
It does. Yeah. And it should. I mean, like, that's why, it's really hard what we're trying to do, building something. So might as well, like, let's do it together as a team. One thing that I would do differently, I think we tried to bite off more than we could chew early on and tried to be more innovative than we needed to get traction. We could have made incremental change for the market to build up a foundation to get more resources and then try to leap forward with real big innovation. But I think we tried to do that first. That caused, adoption issues because people were like, I'm not, especially we're in healthcare. So you think healthcare is like, if you're going to take a big leap forward, they want to see data, studies, FDA stuff to make sure that before they adopt it. We could have taken more incremental steps in healthcare so to build the trust and credibility. And I think that would have actually, going slower to start would have helped us go faster ultimately. But, here we are.
What are some of the wins that maybe they're small now? Because, you're years into it. We're the 8th year, seventh year, yeah. The 7th year. What are some of the wins along the way that, made everybody smile? What's like one that stands out in your mind?
There's so many of like these, like honestly, like from like,
we'll give a couple. Name a couple wins.
So we were 5 employees, including me and Adam, my co-founder. So 2 co-founders and 3 employees that all were kind of like in school doing this together. Like they were the undergrad interns that worked with us. Hiring our first real engineer from industry was like a huge deal for us. We're like, what? You left Lockheed Martin to come here? Are you
with us? We're clowns.
Are you crazy? Like literally, like I remember interviewing him and we tried to talk him out of it. We're like, do you know what you're signing yourself up for? Like, we're going to pay you, I think it was like $90K a year. He could have easily get paid double that in industry. And this is going to be weekends, nights. And by the way, we don't know what we're doing either. So, but no benefit. I mean, it's just like, but having someone like that see the vision and leave his comfy industry life to come with us and stay with us. He was with us for 5 years, was phenomenal, was so cool. That was like one of those things that we celebrated, and we still celebrate all our people. And I still kind of try to talk people out of coming here. I'm like, it's fun, but
we say that we look for missionaries, not mercenaries.
100%. I love that.
And it's one of those things that, at this point we do healthcare and all that stuff. But when you first start your company, I mean, you could not use the word startup and people understand an early company, the benefits, the pay, that is not the reason that you're joining. Part of it's the adventure. And if you're not in for adventure and going into meetings, you're like, what just happened in that room? I don't really know.
Right. They're like, what's our policy on this? I'm like, well, I don't know. What do you want our policy to be on that? It's like, we don't have it, like, do we have
Walmart? We're not Goldman Sachs.
100%. Right. It's like, hey, do you have the company PowerPoint template? No. Like, you can make it up if you want. Like, now it's kind of cool. You go, you see, we have systems, we have processes, we have 401k matching. Like, that stuff was a gradual process. For new employees that come work here, in their first 2 weeks of onboarding, we take them through the history of the company so that they know and appreciate that they're walking into this place, that it wasn't always like this, that we were built from this and evolved over the last 7 years. And hopefully I want that to inspire in them that what they're seeing today is not success either, that this is going to grow and evolve into something even greater, and they're going to be a part of that. Because, I mean, it's kind of insane when you think about what we built.
Our company, we literally started in Mike Laugh's basement, and 2 of our co-founders slept in his basement. So in like a hammock, and it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so when we go to work, our office is cool. It's, a kind of an industrial building that's been converted that's neat. But when I came into your office, there's a WeWork in here that we actually use space in. So I used to work in this building too. But as you come out to it, you can literally see William Penn. You're in the middle of Philadelphia, and you have beautiful windows, and your office is cool, and it's all named certain things. Was that a surreal moment of like getting the keys to this building? Was that a moment?
I mean, yeah, that was a big moment. We had like a big office opening party that the mayor, Jim Kinney at the time, came to our like ribbon cutting ceremony, because we tried to make a big deal about like, we're moving in this big office. We want this to be a place of mental health innovation in Center City, Philly. And every time we come here, it's cool. I mean, our whole idea of wanting to have an office like this, again, in healthcare, I mean, similar to your business too. I mean, you're dealing with large enterprises, governments, and health systems. They don't have a lot of trust. So if you're viewed as like a startup that's trying to figure it out, they're not going to really trust you with the important data that you have. And again, because we're not a startup like that, we have the entire VA's mental health data on our servers. What they are going to do is test you and make sure that you're credible. And so having a big office like this where we can invite them, it really builds that credibility of like, oh, wow, you're a quote real company. And so something that we've definitely celebrated. And we will hold events here. We're going to have happy hours here. It's a lot of fun.
What was it like? You just said something that I think is profoundly cool. You said you have the mental health servers for the VA. Knowing what you said your mission was and the reason that you started, when you first got into the VA and when they said, we're going to trust you with this and we're going to use you, what was that like?
We are literally badged employees of the VA. So we have, I have a VA email that we could communicate and work with the, within the VA ecosystem and store that data on our VA cloud servers. It is humbling to say that, I met with the Undersecretary of VA Health. So here was the coolest moment. He was reporting to the House of Representatives Veteran Affairs Committee. And he was using data on mental health stats to communicate to the committee. That data was our data that we gave them and reported to him. That was one of the most surreal moments to say like, wow, the premise that I can make a bigger impact on the military and the veterans being outside of it, I think rang true to me in that moment. And couldn't do it without like our team, right? Because I've tried for like literally the VA was our first prospect. Some of our early investors said they invested in us because the VA potential. It took me 7 years to get into the VA, and we're finally there. We've been there for a little over a year, and it's crazy.
So we're going to kind of wind down here just for time. So what are any other wins or other advice that you would share about your process here? Is there anything else that you want to kind of share?
Celebrate the wins, celebrate the losses too, because the losses, the failures, sometimes you learn more from the failures than the wins. Like, oh shit, don't do that. That didn't work, or that pricing model doesn't work, or we need to have a backup server because the system went down for a day, and whatever it is, like learn from those failures as well. If people are transitioning out of the military, this is a personal style. Like I've leaned into adopting a lot of the military things. Like I've tried to take the best out of the military experience, not the bureaucratic BS that we talked about, but like the best stuff, and apply it here to the company. And so we do like after action reviews. And most of my employees, I think we have, out of 125 people, we have 12 veterans that work here. So most are civilians. So they love the idea of like, wow, this is what you did in the military. So we do after action reviews when things go bad or well, like let's AAR it. We have Norflow coins that we give out to, new employees or people that go above and beyond, adopt that from the military. We've tried to take a lot of that sense of camaraderie and I think, it's true to yourself and it's true to our background. It's not trying to forget the military, but it's trying to take, again, the best of that world and adapting it to this world. And I think that has been a competitive advantage for us. So celebrate the wins, celebrate the failures, adapt what your experiences were for this world. And the other thing is, and this is important, don't worry about your technology, because your technology is going to change. It's going to evolve. Worry about the problem that you're solving and be focused on that. A lot of people get hung up on, this is my baby. This is my tech. Look at this. It's like, you know how much our tech has changed over the years? It doesn't matter. It matters about the problem that you're solving. And is it a real hair and fire problem for the customer that they're going to be willing to pay for? A lot of companies, I think, are always a really cool tech that is looking for a problem to solve. Don't approach it that way. Approach it from, there's the problem. How am I going to solve that the best way possible? And you'll have a fast-growing, scaling company if you do that.
I strongly believe that as well. When people are like, how'd you come up with the idea? And the truth is that it was not my idea. Like I came into something with other people and, very early in the thought process of it. But I think that you have to solve a problem. And
Zero Eyes does that.
That's literally it. Because it really comes down to this. Something that really bothers you, that you hate, fix. And that's a company. And like it's anything other than like when you're looking for a way to create revenue, or it's not going to work.
Right.
Do something that really bothers you, that you're like, this is stupid, and fix it.
Right.
And then do that for money.
Like, a great example is SpaceX and Elon Musk. He tried to create a rocket company. He found out that rockets were way too expensive. He said, why? Well, it's because they're disposable one-time use rockets. So he said, the way I'm going to fix that is create reusable rockets. Now, that's a really dramatic example,
right.
But I think it drives the point home of like, he was not like, I had this idea for reusable rockets. He tried to solve this problem and said, how am I going to solve it? This is how I'm going to solve it.
Okay. So let's do a little bit of a lightning round of why you are who you are. So we talked about a little bit of this, of a book that inspired you. You talked about Marcus Aurelius and meditations, how you brought that to McDonald's, and Stoicism, which is an interesting way to do it. But what are some books or movies that you grew up with that either that you liked or that influenced who you are today?
Books, I really like Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And then business books, probably my favorite one is Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Oh, that one too.
Yeah. Favorite quote is the chess, not checkers. This isn't checkers. This is motherfucking chess. There's always a move. I mean, I read that book all the time, and I'm like, wow, he's like talking to me.
So I read that came out while you're doing this, right? I don't remember when, but that was like
18, I think.
Yeah. So I was reading that while doing Zero Eyes, and I think it's interesting. I still don't know that there's no solution in that book. I think that you just realize like there's not a right way to do this and there's not a path to follow. What you think is probably okay.
Yeah.
Like if you've determined you should do this move, then you should. And no business book tells you how to do almost anything. There's 3 good ideas in a business book that make a good article, and they write a book, and then they're just like, I don't know. I think you got lucky. I don't know if this really applies. Like there's 3 good points that you should take, but you read that book and you realize everything was a train wreck. Everything was hard. He hired like the right sales guy one time and it kind of worked, and it was counterintuitive, and you feel like somebody's thinking the way that you are, like this sucks.
Like there's empathy there.
Right.
You know, misery loves company. So hard thing about hard things. I love reading bios just because of, you know, it's like, wow, I want to hear how Ben Franklin grew up as a kid and like what made him who he is. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. So I love reading bios. And as far as movies go, I don't know if this is going to be corny or not, but Forrest Gump, hands down.
Yeah.
Now we talk about like, that's a guy that is just, he's a good person. He wants to do well, and he does everything like the best way he knows how, because he doesn't know how to do it any other way. And, you know, he's not the smartest person, but it demonstrates like when you put yourself into positions, serendipity takes over in a lot of cases. And I've learned that too. Like 80% of life is just showing up, and you don't know what else is going to like happen and take over. And I think Forrest Gump is like the epitome of that. You just show up, be a good person, and next thing you know, you're meeting the presidents and winning Heisman's and doing all that stuff, right?
Well, let's hope that serendipity takes over from here. Is there anything, a final word for you? Anything you want to say? You want to share?
Well, maybe on a note, mission oriented to Neuroflow. Veterans Day just passed. Holidays are a really tough time for a lot of people, whether that's remembering people that you've lost, stressful with money and so forth. It's also a great opportunity to reach out to people. I try to reach out to old friends, even if I haven't talked to them in years. Text them, call them, check in on them. If you need help from a mental health standpoint, there are a ton of resources out there. Don't let the holidays take you down. Like, you view it as an opportunity to rekindle relationships and find that strength to do that.
Awesome. Chris, thank you for letting me come to your office. Thank you for sitting down with me and sharing your experience.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.